Good evening, everyone. Is it on? Good evening. I thought it was the microphone in our brand new AV system, but it's not. It's just an exciting night, and there's buzz in the room. So let me welcome you officially. I'm Harold Holzer, and I have the honor of serving as director of the Roosevelt House Public Policy Institute at Hunter College. And I'm honored as well to be a talking head without makeup in the film you will see tonight, Going to the Devil, the Impeachment of 1868, a production that could not be more timely, more telling, more important, and more beautifully done. On behalf of Jennifer Rabb, the president of Hunter College, I want to welcome you in a perfect place at a perfect moment. This is the home of one of the most inclusive of American presidents for all his battles with the legislative and judicial branches of government. Franklin D. Roosevelt worked closely with Congress, including a loyal opposition, through two of the most challenging crises in American history, and the Great Depression and World War II. And as you know, we're privileged today that public policy and human rights undergraduate students at Hunter work and study these days in this sacred space, which is not only where FDR and Eleanor lived alongside their Eleanor's mother-in-law for 25 years. We call it the first New Deal. But this is the home where Franklin Roosevelt overcame his physical disability, where he learned to have some mobility in the little elevator that you may have seen upstairs, and where he got himself strong enough to walk or to push himself along on crutches. Upstairs is where he negotiated the New Deal, the elements of the New Deal. It's where Social Security was born. Thank you, FDR, for letting me be in this space. It was the transition headquarters for 4 months between Election Day 1932 and Inauguration Day 1933. And the day after Election Day, Herbert Hoover, not having conceded because it was such a close election, but he did not immediately concede, so FDR did not get to make his victory speech in the hotel ballroom, which they had rented for the evening. So the day after, he was wheeled into the upstairs parlor, one flight above where we had our reception this evening. And there he spoke to the American people for just 60 seconds, seated in front of the fireplace in his family parlor. Then he repeated it for Fox Movie Tone News. That was his only victory statement. And in essence, it's where the first fireside chat was created, although it doesn't count in the chronology and in the listings of fireside chats. Just a word more about this historic date, because it's very meaningful that we're here today, because this very day, 150 years ago, an Irish-born educator created a women's teaching college, a normal school, as it was called in those days, in downtown Manhattan. It would eventually move to the Upper East Side. It would be in the Bronx for a while. It would come back after a fire to occupy Park Avenue and Lexington Avenue, and would eventually be named for this innovative educator, Thomas Hunter, who ordained that it be opened, as he said, in language that may sound politically insensitive today or socially insensitive, but was considered radical in its day. He wanted a school where the Negro shall sit next to the white and the Christian shall sit next to the Jew. Innovative, revolutionary. So today's the birthday of Hunter College, so let's hear it for Hunter. And the Roosevelts and Hunter have always urged us to use the inspiring past to light the way for an even greater future, to look at history and gain inspiration for the challenges to come. So it's important that we're here in this place, and exciting to see a screening of this film that I had a tiny, tiny part in, but was privileged to work with the great courses people. And today, thanks to my old friend, he's not old, but I've known him since he was a college grad, Seth Cowler, who is not sitting in his seat, so I don't know where he is. He's probably there, Seth. Well, you're better off there for the screening. He has lent us this extraordinary relic of the Andrew Johnson impeachment, just adding authenticity to the interpretive material we'll see in a few minutes. Seth is one of the leading manuscript dealers in New York, and thanks to him and an anonymous owner, you can press him later after another glass of wine to find out who owns this extraordinary congressional impeachment resolution of Andrew Johnson signed by all the proud members of Congress in 1868. And as I said to him upstairs, in an era in which Mitch McConnell would not even allow souvenir pens, right? He made everybody use one pen to sign their pledge to hear the evidence in a fair manner. I won't get into how they responded, but they did not get a souvenir pen. It's good to know that there are souvenirs, and this is an extraordinary remembrance of a time when the country was fractured. And thank you, Seth, for bringing it. So we will have a screening, we will have a discussion, and I am so grateful to the Great Courses people who believe in something Hunter believes in, which is lifelong learning through all media. And they have created a library of coursework with great lecturers. And I was just so proud and privileged to have been asked to be in the documentary. So without further ado, let me introduce our real host tonight. I've taken all this time just to set the table, representing the Great Courses which created this film. Please welcome its extraordinary Vice President, Jason Smigel.
Thank you, Harold, for the suggestion to have the screening here at this very historic and presidential location. This is fantastic. So thank you for hosting us. Also joining us is another one of the esteemed experts in the film, David Stewart, who will be joining us afterward for comments. Thank you for coming to this event and many others as we've been kind of on the road with this production. It's very exciting. Our third expert, Brenda Wineapple, is actually teaching across town this evening, so she is unable to join us. So on behalf of the Great Courses, we're very honored to have you all here to join us this evening. As Harold had mentioned, my name is Jason Smigel. I'm the Vice President of Product Development at the Great Courses. I'm in charge of the creative team that helped put this piece together. I have to be honest with you, we've worked with folks like four-star journal Wesley Clark. One of our super customers, Bill Gates, has come to visit us on site. I was there for that. And on a regular basis, we have many talented, esteemed experts and luminaries of our time who come to work with us in our studio. But that does not make me as nervous as I am here tonight, standing in front of all of you. We have a great crowd here with us this evening. And I appreciate you coming tonight to join us on this rainy evening here in New York. But I don't want to keep us from our main attraction, the movie Going to the Devil. But it's important for me to let you know why it's important that you are here with us this evening. You look at the positive reception that we have had to this film recently, and that validates a lot of the direction that we're going and the steps that we're taking to undertake an effort like this. We started in August and we released it in November, so in a very short time frame. I think we only had a couple of weeks to figure out if we were able to get you guys down to the studio. So huge effort on our part to be able to do that. But we do this in a point in time where there are folks out there that produce documentaries on a regular basis. There's a 24/7 news cycle, so you can get right into that if you want to. But when we produced this piece, we did it as we do the Great Courses in a way that is nonpartisan, in a way that is even-handed and fair, factual. We do this because we know that we can do this, and maybe others might not be willing to go down that path. So rather than impeach Trump or investigate the Bidens. We wind that back to a point in time in history where you can draw your own conclusions, garner your own insights, something that is personal to you. So that's who we are at the Great Courses. And it's exciting for us to really start in this new path. In addition to that, this is something new for us, shorter content. I've talked to a couple of you who are customers of ours. We typically produce productions that are 6 to 12 hours in length. So, this is 75 minutes, but it still fulfills that deep, rich, impactful content that we are known for and that we are delivering in this piece. We go to where our customers lead us and the topics that they want to know and hopefully give them that experience. So one might argue that we're at a point in time today that is the golden age of nonfiction, right? Bill Gates recently was quoted saying, there's never been a better time to be alive if you are curious. And I'm an intensely curious person. We at the Great Courses believe in that. There's so much out there, and where we are today, the opportunities that we have are limitless for us to have our curiosity, where that's going to take us, where our customers' curiosity is going to take this, and where as storytellers and crafters of content, we can create those experiences for many to consume. So with that, the journey ahead of us this evening is to take us to another time where America was very divided, and I hope you enjoy the film Going to the Devil. Thank you.
Thank you all for staying. Wasn't that a terrific documentary? I've been made painfully aware of the limits of my own speaking voice by having this guy speaking with me. So, but I'm daring to share the stage with you. I just want to take 1 second before we have a brief conversation and then turn to you for any questions you might have, to acknowledge Elliott Smith, who wrote that piece so beautifully and who is here with us today. Elliott, please stand up. So one of the things I wanted to raise that we didn't get a chance to talk about is how culpable, in a way, politically, Abraham Lincoln was by either encouraging or facilitating or tolerating the dumping of Hannibal Hamlin. There is no smoking gun that says that Abraham Lincoln instructed delegates to nominate Johnson, but there are several subordinates who left records of carrying those instructions to the Baltimore Convention. What's your view on that? Did Lincoln want Johnson?
It was a very frustrating thing to research because the evidence is not clear. But who else could have done it, was my reaction. He was the president. And it was a cold-blooded political calculation. He just thought he would have a better chance of re-election with Johnson. What we used to call a move to the middle, to appeal to border state voters and to Democrats. And I don't think anybody else had the ability to make that decision.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you. And 2 of his private secretaries were dispatched to the convention. I think it's probably the worst decision that Lincoln ever made, in a way. And if you think he made some, this was not a wise one, because Johnson was intemperate, because he was angry. But presidents in those days, and in a way up to Franklin Roosevelt, who sort of backed into Harry Truman after he wanted to dump Wallace in 1944, fortuitously, as it turned out. Some may differ, but mostly fortuitously. Presidents didn't push it, but they made their hand known. Even Roosevelt never asked Truman. He sort of yelled on the phone that Truman would decline. If he declined, he would be disloyal, and someone held the phone up so Truman could hear it. That was his invitation. Totally different than now. So keep that in mind. So Johnson is unelected. He's a Southerner. He's a Democrat. And Lincoln, just to make clear, he wanted to expand the Republican Party, so he created this new political party called the National Union Party that was supposed to unite four Democrats. He still might not have won had not Sherman taken Atlanta the day of the Democratic Convention, which, as they say, is a bad news story for the Democratic Convention, right? Took the headline.
Yeah, he only got 55% of the vote, and the Southerners didn't vote. So
Right.
it was not a resounding win.
A lot of electoral votes. New Jersey, I hate to say it, Tony Stepanski, they voted against Abraham Lincoln. One of our wonderful board members is from New Jersey, but so I like to tease him. He's leaving as a result of this information. So I want to quote a line from the Chicago Tribune that you used in your book, David, a wonderful book that I hope you've all seen. You should get it. It's the definitive book on the impeachment process. Bad articles, said the Chicago Tribune, about the impeachment, and lame managers. Do you buy into that? Because Ben Butler was a pretty good lawyer. He was a hideous person, but he was a.
Yeah, on behalf of the legal profession, let me rise on that point. He was a clever lawyer. I don't think he was a good lawyer.
Okay.
Because he had a talent for alienating people. And, he announced he was going to try the president as though he was a horse thief. That was not respectful. It was not what you do. In the trial itself, he got ensnared in a bunch of evidence. We don't know what this looks like from the impeachment trial, supposed trial that we just have been through. But they actually had evidentiary arguments for days on end. And it was a waste of time because everybody knew the facts, another contrast. And, that was picked up by people like the Chicago Tribune who really thought it had been a poor performance. The articles themselves, and again, you can see an analogy. You have 3 years plus of misconduct that has enraged people, and they end up picking on this one event. And I think in all impeachments that we've had, there haven't been many, it's the buildup of dissatisfaction with the president that ultimately leads to the moment when they can't stand it anymore. And in retrospect, it looks like, gee, why was that the thing that bothered them? So,
But the argument, which we have heard anew, is that you can't convict without a convictable crime, that high crimes and misdemeanors remains as vague as it appeared in 1868, although Hamilton was pretty specific about it.
Hamilton was specific about it, and I stand with Elliott Smith on this. I think it's not a difficult question. It is abuse of office. That is the proper standard. There's lots of English history going back to the 12th century. And I become even mildly pedantic about it. The Constitution says treason, bribery, and other high crimes and misdemeanors. If they wanted to require crimes, all they had to say was treason, bribery, and other crimes. Fine, you've required crimes, but they didn't. They said other high crimes and misdemeanors. They didn't mean to require crimes. A lot of times what is not in the statute or the Constitution is as important as what is in it. So I don't think it's actually that hard a question. I understand why lawyers make arguments to try to defend their clients.
You're talking like a lawyer again.
Well, it happens.
So, I'm struck with some differences in the experiences that the country has just passed through. My wife and I had the opportunity to sit in the Senate gallery last week, invited by Senator Dick Durbin. There was not exactly a huge competition for space. It was 1/5 full. And I don't know if that was because of security concerns. It was also, you think airline security is tough. It was a brutal security check, and we were not allowed to talk, not allowed binoculars. And, there are scenes that Seth brought us a couple of illustrated weekly scenes of the ladies' galleries where people are looking through spyglasses. And it was very strictly enforced. But we did get to see the Chief Justice say, and the ritual is interesting. You didn't get to see it on C-SPAN because a senator would ask a question, a page would take the written question, walk all around the aisle, and then it would be handed to a clerk. The Chief Justice gets it, and he said to Rand Paul, "I will not read Senator Paul's question." We got to see that, so it was interesting. The other difference is I love the idea of the lead prosecutor, Thaddeus Stevens, being born in a litter to the floor. I can't quite see Adam Schiff or Jerry Nadler being born, but it added some high drama, did it not?
It did. There is another moment in American history where when Ben Franklin went to the Constitutional Convention, he was born in a litter too. So those are a couple of pretty good examples.
I just want to take one moment on behalf of Roosevelt House because Jerry Nadler has spoken from this stage many times, and his wife, Joyce Miller, is serving, and I hope will continue to serve as a teacher in the public policy department here. And as you may know, and we've known for some time, Jerry announced that his wife was ill and that he would be missing sessions, and he was sort of non-participatory in the last few sessions. So I just want to say on behalf of Roosevelt House that we all wish Joyce recovery, and we hope she comes back here and speaks in public again. The one other thing we haven't spoken about is that during these proceedings, before them particularly, Johnson organized what he called a swing around the circle and what we would call today rallies. So parallels continue. Talk to us a little bit, and I'll chime in as well, about Johnson's kind of crazed rallies. And people were talking about the intemperate language and the haranguing and carrying on for support.
Yeah, the analogy is pretty good. They were both angry guys. They were devotees of a politics of grievance. And Johnson would speak for hours. And evidently, I've not been to one of the current rallies, but evidently that is a characteristic. And it did fire up some supporters, but it creates great division when your national leader does that, and we've seen it come back.
I just wrote a little article about one of the rallies. It's sort of a sidebar to the main story, which was the dedication of the Stephen A. Douglas Monument in Chicago. Johnson used it as one of his rallies, and General Grant, who attended, left the tour. He said he wasn't going to be part of it anymore because they had become so incendiary. I will say there, though, Johnson was not as effective in the rallies as modern presidents are in rallies. He was just not, I mean, he had his supporters, but he was shouted down, he was booed, he was heckled. Well, I mean, that was a tradition in the 19th century also.
There was a moment when he compared himself to Jesus Christ and said that he was being tormented by his critics, and if he had to be laid upon the national altar and have all of his blood spilled out to save the Union, he was ready to do it. And pretty much nobody thought that was okay.
I think he may have overdone it.
Yeah.
Before we turn to questions, I do want to spend a second about Edmund Ross, the senator from Kansas, who may or may not have taken money, probably did, even if indirectly, to change his vote. By the way, I don't know if you saw a great scanning of the ballot or the tally. Fessenden was in there too, voting to acquit, and he was another Lincoln cabinet member. But so Edmund G. Ross is principally known today to those of us of a certain age because John F. Kennedy celebrated him in Profiles in Courage. He was one of his profiles and coverage. Of course, then you get to the second layer, which is that Kennedy didn't write the book, but he also won a Pulitzer Prize for the book that he didn't write. But
Awkward, isn't it?
Awkward. And Ted Sorensen didn't write that section either. It was written by an historian whose name I forget. So it's very complicated. Why do you think JFK celebrated Edmund Ross? Do you have any clue, or at least signed his name to the celebration of Ross? And what's your take on Ross?
Ross was a crook.
Do you want to think about that a little?
No. I spent a lot of time chasing him down. They bought his seat. I mean, he just was not a good guy. And you can't put dollars in his pocket, but you know he hung out with all the corrupt people, and everything tells you that his vote was purchased. Why Kennedy got it wrong, or, you know, there was, this is boring historiography, so I'm going to do it fast. You know, the saying has been that the North won the war and the South won the peace, because the history of Reconstruction and really until the Civil Rights era of 1940s and 50s was that poor old Andy Johnson got crucified by these nasty radical Republicans, and he was just trying to heal the wounds of the country. In fact, he was making the wounds of the country much worse. But that was the historiography.
Absolutely.
And Kennedy's book is the tail end of that wave, and that was what people were told. And since then, it's been 70 years of people going back and saying, wow, how did they get it so wrong?
Yeah, I think that's a good analysis. And as we all grapple with catch-up history, whether it's perhaps exaggerated, as the Times, I would suggest, or that's a subject for another day, has done with the 1619 Project, or it's a really important and crucial renewal of attention on Confederate memorials and what their meaning should be, or whether they should have no meaning, or whether they should exist in an America hopefully committed to equality and equality of opportunity, is a serious question, and it's an outgrowth from the same Dunning School focus to out-historiograph you on what we learned in school, from elementary school on, about the outrages of Reconstruction, which in fact were meant to preserve the shreds of opportunity that were extended by the Civil War. So, by the way, 15th Amendment is also 150 years old. It was ratified, not to obsess about our own sesquicentennial, was ratified 6 days before the founding of Hunter College. So it's the same celebration. So who has a question for us? We need you to wait for the mic. Justina has the microphone.
Hi. So I do want to say one really quick thing, which is that growing up, I did not hear at all that Andrew Johnson was, it was definitely not taught to us that Andrew Johnson was being crucified by these awful Republicans. So I think that the story has changed. But my quick question.
I think you're a little younger than we are, but that's okay.
Yeah.
It's good to know
Just
that
saying
the
that, yeah,
curriculum
exactly,
has been modernized.
That it's moving in a different direction. I don't know how much either one of you know of kind of other candidates at the time, but in terms of going back to Lincoln and why he chose Johnson, you know, I mean, obviously it's a clear, cold political move, but was there somebody else that possessed was there anybody else that he could have considered that would have potentially appealed to that same demographic that Johnson did, who wasn't as perhaps quite as unhinged or whatever?
So I'll weigh in. So when Lincoln runs in 1860 and he does not choose his own running mate, he's viewed as the quintessential Westerner. So they found an Eastern Republican whom he'd met once, and he didn't remember meeting Lincoln, so he couldn't have made a huge impression. From Maine, can't get much more Eastern than that. In now creating an alliance with war Democrats, he definitely, I mean, most Democrats are going to stay loyal to the Democratic Party. Only one Democratic senator, as the documentary makes clear, only one remained loyal to the Union and stayed in the Senate at great risk. So he was kind of a hero of the war. I mean, if I was advising Lincoln, I would have said, stay with Hamlin. You've won before, even though you only won 39% of the vote. It's at least a winning ticket in the North. Hamlin is considered anti-slavery. So I don't know what the advantage was of this Union ticket because it didn't accomplish that much, except he won Maryland, which is interesting.
Yeah.
Who are your candidates?
Great
question.
Yeah, it's a good question. I can't think of another candidate who would have performed whatever function Johnson performed, and I think Harold's correct to question whether he really did perform that function.
I have a dream ticket, but he didn't live. So, I mean, although we have romanticized Lincoln's, quote, friendship with Stephen Douglas, whom he defeated for the presidency in 1860, Douglas does spend the last months of his life campaigning for the Union in the South. And he also gave a speech on the Senate floor praising Lincoln's first inaugural address. So I wonder where Douglas would have evolved if he had lived, and whether that would have been like a dream ticket. Probably wouldn't have worked, but that's the only alternative. Douglas and Lincoln were Hamilton and Burr. I don't think. Well, they didn't do weapons, so it was different.
Two from Illinois might have been hard.
That's true too. You lose the electoral votes. Yeah. But we could have relocated Douglas by that point. Any other questions? Yes, right here. Wait for the mic, please.
How was the acquittal of Johnson treated in the press, and how did the people deal with it? What did they think of it?
That's a great question. There were celebrations in many cities, and some northern cities. I seem to recall Philadelphia had a big celebration. And for me, the most interesting thing was people just kind of moved on. I mean, there had been real hysteria. There had been anxiety that we were going to have a second Civil War. And then it was over. And, there was an election coming up, so that focused the mind. And that may have played a big role in that. But I think there's also a sort of cathartic thing that happens with impeachments. When they're over, and the constitutional process, however flawed it is, has had its way.
And the conventions were right after the acquittal vote. And Johnson imagines himself maybe the Republican candidate, maybe the Democratic candidate, with no real standing in either party, with no grounding. One of the reasons I think the press has got it a little bit wrong now to say that Senator Romney's vote was the first time in American history in which a senator of an accused president's own party has voted to convict, is that Johnson's political standing was so ambiguous in 1868. He was elected with the first Republican president, albeit in a unity ticket. So I just think that's a difficult comparison.
Yeah.
That's my 2 cents. Any others? Seth, wait for the mic.
Yes. So I agree that I can't think of another candidate who would have been this sort of fusion ticket, but I have to think about what would have happened had Sherman not won that victory. Lincoln really was afraid of losing, and so it's one of these really great moral compromises. But what do you think the odds were if this victory that was eventually going to happen but didn't have to happen then took much longer? Could Lincoln have lost the election?
So my own view, I'm just basing it on Lincoln's own feelings in August of 1864. He makes his cabinet members sign an unseen pledge, sight unseen, to support the next administration, meaning General McClellan, the Democratic nominee, if he's defeated, in order to promulgate emancipation and, as to the extent possible, and win the war, because after the inauguration there won't be any prosecution of the war. He tells the editor of the New York Times, about whom we heard in this documentary, Henry Raymond, who was running for Congress, running the New York Times, and running the Republican National Committee or the Union National Committee. Can you imagine if the Sulzbergers were heading the DNC now? It's unbelievable, but he was doing all of the above. He gave up on his resistance to compromise, and he said, if you want to talk to Jefferson Davis about a compromise and an armistice, go ahead, do whatever you want. And then he told Frederick Douglass, please, let's organize an army of bounty hunting African Americans who will go into southern states and spread the word of emancipation to as many people of color as possible before McClellan takes office, because it's only an executive order. And as we know, a president can countermand an executive order with another executive order, which I think demonstrates Lincoln's sincerity on emancipation as much as it shows his belief that he was going to lose up until September 1st. So the Democratic Convention opens and Sherman takes Atlanta. And it changes. There is no public opinion polling, as you know, in 1864, but I can just calculate it by Lincoln's mood.
I just want to use this apparent opportunity I have to underscore what a good movie this is. It really hits so many important points. The team that put it together, the script that Elliot wrote, they're just remarkable. They got that Thaddeus Stevens was the key guy, and I'm just so impressed with it. And bravo.
And what do you say about the great course's sense of timing?
It's pretty good.
Pretty good. We should all see this, if nothing else, aside from its excellence, if nothing else to assure us that what Lincoln said of the Capitol Dome is true about the government. If it goes on, meaning the construction of the dome, it's an assurance that the country will go on. We have been through crises, we've been through divisiveness, and we've emerged. So we can all, even at this late hour when I know you're anxious to get home, we can say thank you for this lesson and this assurance that we all have a future together. Thank you.